Hey, good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? Hope you're having a fantastic day. Today, August the 21st, and we're going to continue here on B&B Hockey Talk with our 31 teams in 31 days. I'm your co-host, Aaron Bloxel, with Matthew Balzer, and we love bringing this to you. Make sure you hit the like or the love button and subscribe to us on Facebook and or YouTube. Thanks again for joining us. So today we are talking Washington Capitals, defending Stanley Cup champions. Big head coaching change, losing Barry Trotz and now going with Todd Reirden. Why don't you touch on that a little bit, Matt, and bring us into potential forward lineup?
All right. Well, first, I just want to give a quick shout out to my cousin Conrad, who it's his birthday. In our family, August is the main birthday groups. But yeah, I just like to thank him for all the support he's done for the page with all the likes and everything. But yeah, with the coaching change in Washington, I don't think it'll be too much of a change in style, just because I believe he was the assistant coach under Barry Trotz last year. So I'm not expecting too much of a system change or anything of that effect. And with basically the same team coming back as last year, shouldn't be too much of a big difference.
Well, let's get into their forward combinations. Like you said, there's not a lot of changes. We talked about before we went on air about how this team is locked up for several years. Some good contracts, some not so good contracts. Let's go. Let's talk about it.
All right. Yeah, so just to get into everything, basically their entire core is locked up for 3 years or more. Like, the only guys that are 2 years or less are Backstrom and Holtby, still have 2 years left on their contracts. But guys like Kuznetsov, Oshie, Wilson, Eller, Carlson, Orlov, Kempny, all these guys are locked up for many, many more years still. And their only RFAs going to be at the end of the year are Burakovsky, Verana, and Juice, all still younger players that won't be too expensive at the end of the year. But yeah, just to get into it, my favorite player in the NHL, I was so pumped to see him finally lift that Stanley Cup, Alexander Ovechkin, Yevgeny Kuznetsov, and Tom Wilson. Ovechkin, I'll say it, I believe he's the greatest goal scorer of all time in the NHL. I know there's a couple of guys that could challenge him, but just in this era of the NHL, where goals are so difficult to come by, he just consistently puts up between 40, 50 plus goals. He's scored 50 goals in a season 7 times in his NHL career, and he has 607 goals in total in just over 1,000 games, which is crazy to think that over half of his games he scored at least 1 goal, and he scored another 61 goals in 121 playoff games. Just I can't speak more highly of Alexander Ovechkin. And his line mates, Yevgeny Kuznetsov, led the playoffs in points the last year with 32 points and had 83 points in 79 games. He switched out with Backstrom on that top line. Usually Backstrom had been playing with Ovechkin, but Trotz put the two Russians together, and they really took off this year. And the third guy, Tom Wilson, started off in the bottom 6 at the beginning of the year, but Trotz moved him up onto that top line, and he really clicked on that top line, being that big physical force in front of the net, living on the edge at times in the playoffs, and having a couple of suspensions in the playoffs and during the regular season. But yeah, he just got that massive contract, over $5 million a year. I'm hoping he can live up to that. He only had 35 points last year, but he had 15 points in about 20 playoff games in the playoffs. The second line I have is Jacob Verana, Nicholas Backstrom, and TJ Oshie. Nicholas Backstrom, I think, is probably the least talked about, like, best playmaker in the NHL. He has 590 assists in 815 games in the regular season. Many of those to Alex Ovechkin over the years. And the two guys that weighed like the most to lift that Stanley Cup for Washington were Ovechkin and Backstrom. Jacob Vrana had a really good rookie year. Started off a little slowly, but he ended up with 27 points in 73 games. And TJ Oshie, who had another big playoffs, had 21 points in the playoffs. Really clicked on that top power play unit with Backstrom, Kuznetsov, Carlson, and Ovechkin. It's really nice when you got those three right-handed shots, and Backstrom and Kuznetsov just have to feed them for one-timers. The third line I have is Andre Burakovsky, Lars Eller, and Brett Connolly. Lars Eller could probably be the unsung hero for the Capitals' playoff run, with Backstrom going down to injuries and so forth. He ended up with 18 points during the playoff run, and moved up to that second line when they needed somebody to step up. Andre Burakovsky dealt with some injuries during the season. He only played 56 games, but he had 25 points. And Brett Connolly is another guy that they brought in and should provide more depth on the wing. The fourth line I have is Chandler Stevenson, Travis Boyd, and Devontae Smith-Pelly. Smith-Pelly is another guy. He only had 7 goals in 75 games during the regular season. He had 7 goals in the playoffs, so he matched his regular season goal total in the playoffs. Chandler Stevenson, I was actually quite impressed with in the playoffs. He brings a lot of speed on that wing. And Travis Boyd, I believe, will be replacing Jay Beagle on that fourth line, as Beagle's like the only notable name that the Caps lost in the offseason, along with trading Philip Grubauer. And the extra forwards I have is Nick Dowd and Nathan Walker. Dowd, who played in Vancouver last year, right-handed centerman, could get in on that fourth line, depending on if they want to go with a younger guy like Travis Boyd or with a veteran presence. But yeah, just another big thing with their playoff run is when the big guns weren't going, each guy like Burakovsky and Vrana, they each stepped up at big moments when they needed them to. And yeah, just great balance throughout that forward lineup.
A few notes I have. Nathan Walker, of course, the first ever player to play in the NHL from Australia as well. You said Ovechkin, one of the best ever all time, and I know older people like me might fight you on that with guys like Pavel Bure, obviously Timo Solani, Brett Hull, Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux. Different time, different era, but man, those guys used to put up 70, 80 goals a season in some of those seasons. But Ovechkin definitely in the modern era is one of the most pure goal scorers. This forward lineup is built for speed and skill. That was one of the things I liked about them in the playoffs is how fast they were, how fast they could forecheck and get on guys and create that pressure all over the ice. I know some of our listeners absolutely hate Tom Wilson for the way he plays. He's big, he's strong, and if he doesn't cross that line on the edge, he's a very effective player. And like you mentioned, that power play unit, absolutely unbelievable. I never even thought about it until you brought it up, but both Backstrom and Kuznetsov play along either the half wall or down low, and they have 3 different options for a one-timer, either the high slot, or the point, the high slot, or the left side, and that makes for one heck of an effective power play, that's for sure, and those 5 players definitely do that. Let's talk about their defense now. They were able to keep both Michael Kempny and John Carlson. I think that was very important. Kempny came over from Chicago and had a great season and incredible playoff. John Carlson, though, is the heartbeat of this defense. Absolutely great offensively gifted player. And like I said, he's on that number 1 power play unit, complementing the rest of those players. Dmitry Orlov, lots of talent, lots of skill. He was around some crazy bounces in the playoffs, but they've got him locked up long-term and absolutely great 2-3 defenseman. Matt Niskanen has some Stanley Cups with Pittsburgh. Now he has a Stanley Cup with Washington. And I know Marc-Andre Fleury, when he was with Pittsburgh, would cross his name off his helmet when he had some of the old teammates' names on his helmet. But he just had a great playoff as well. more of a stay-at-home defenseman. Can put up some offense when he wants to be, but Orlov, of course, needs a guy to be able to stay at home because of sometimes the way he gambles. And youngsters, Christian Djoos, Madison Bowie round out their defense. Both guys had great seasons. Christian Djoos I was really impressed with in his rookie season. Nothing but good things coming from him. And, of course, they were able to re-sign after trading him Brooks Orpik, who definitely slow of foot, but is effective at shot blocking and clearing that front of the net. Kind of like Derek Engelland on Las Vegas. I think a lot of teams, even though they're slower, they're very underrated when it comes to penalty killing and being able to clear that front of the net out of the way because of how much sacrifice they do to their body. Aaron Ness is potentially an eighth defenseman, but I think he'll spend majority of his season in Hershey in the American League. We're going to get into prospects in a little bit, but I think they're a team that doesn't have a lot of prospects, but they do have a lot of up-and-coming young defensemen, I think, who will, not potentially this year, but in the next year or two, challenge for spots down the road with this defense. So, Matt, why don't you take us through some of your thoughts on their defense and then take us through their goaltending, including one of the best NHL goalie prospects in the league.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Carlson getting that huge new contract, 8 years at $8 million, led all defensemen in points last year with 15 goals and 68 points. So if you get one of those defensemen that hover around that 70-point mark, that's pretty rare in the NHL. But yeah, Michael Kempny, probably one of the steals of the trade deadline. This guy was a healthy scratch for the Chicago Blackhawks, and he went on to be on the top pair for Washington in the playoffs, and he turned that into a new 4-year deal, $2.5 million a year. Just that big top four they were able to really lean on. And with those two younger guys, Christian Djoos and Madison Bowie, or Bowie, depending on how you pronounce it, I forget which way. But yeah, Djoos and Bowie, I'm both expecting to make big jumps because Djoos, especially in the American League, was around that 40-50 point mark. So I think he still has a lot more offense to give. And if he can get on that second power play unit, I think he can get around the 20 to 30 point mark this year. And Bowie was that extra defenseman in the playoffs. Didn't get into any playoff games, but still got into about 51 games until Kempny and Jacob Urbeck were both brought in at the deadline, and then he didn't get much into the lineup. But he still had 12 points in 51 games. And I think he'll be a huge step. It'll be interesting to see if Orpik stays on that bottom pair or if they rest him throughout the season. So in playoff-wise, he's still healthy. But, yeah, that big thing with trading him to Colorado, his cap hit was at $5.5 million. And with them trading Colorado and Colorado buying him out, they only have to pay him $1 million this year. So saving $4.5 million against the cap was big.
Yeah, and that defense outside of Brooks Orpik, the other six guys can all skate very well, and I keep bringing this up because their defense, their forwards, they're fast. They've got a lot of speed, and that was one of their success. I mean, this is definitely – the NHL has shifted to definitely a fast man's game right now, and they're not so concerned with size. And you're starting to see that more and more around the league. And now that Washington won the Cup, I'm curious to see how many teams, have that copycat approach that's pretty common in the league. So let's take us through the goaltending. I know you're big on some of these guys. Let's talk about them and go through that.
All right. So there'll be a bit of a switch up in net. Well, last year it was Braden Holtby and Philip Grubauer, but Grubauer got traded in the offseason to the Colorado Avalanche. But I'll just touch on Grubauer before I get to Holtby. Grubauer was a huge part of Washington's season last year. He went 15-10-3, .923 save percentage and 3 shutouts. And with Holtby struggling over the season, like his record was still good, but his numbers weren't the greatest. I'll touch that in a second. But yeah, Grubauer outplayed Holtby down the stretch. He started the first 2 playoff games over Holtby. And I still think Grubauer did deserve to start over Holtby in the playoffs. But yeah, Holtby's numbers, his record was 34-16-4, which are great, but his save percentage was only .907, and his goals against average was 2.99, and 0 shutouts. But once when he got the net in the playoffs, he led them to the Stanley Cup. He had one of the most memorable saves in Stanley Cup history with that huge paddle save. Still can't believe he made that save, but that was the turning point in the Stanley Cup final. But yeah, he in the playoffs he went 16-7, a .922 save percentage, 2 shutouts, and a 2.16 goals against average. But the big thing with Holtby in years previous, even with them losing to Pittsburgh and stuff, his playoff numbers have been always really, really, really good in the playoffs. It's just that teams, they've always come up short, or it's been like close 1-goal games, and Washington had just come out on the wrong end of it. But but Holtby really regained his form in the playoffs. One thing I will bring up is that their goalie coach, Mitch Korn, left to the New York Islanders to be with Barry Trotz, as both of those guys have always been together through Nashville, Washington, and now the New York Islanders. So it'll be interesting to see how the goaltending coach changes things up, or how he's able to work through that. But yeah, their backup spot this year will be between 2 goalies. Phoenix Copley, who I believe will be the favorite, at least to start the season as the backup, only has a couple NHL games experience, and that was with the St. Louis Blues. He played down in Hershey, and Hershey was not good in the American League last year, but he went 15-17-4 with an .896 save percentage and a 2.91 goals against average and 2 shutouts. He is the older of the goalies, and I think he will start as the backup unless if they end up signing somebody right before the season starts on a cheap deal, but I don't see that happening. But the goalie they will be looking forward to as their backup goalie, maybe as the season goes on, is their first-round pick from 2015, Ilya Samsonov, who spent the past few years in the KHL. And last year he got into 26 games, went 12-9-1, but had a .926 save percentage and 3 shutouts in the KHL. So I think for him, he'll start in the American League just because he hasn't been over on the North American ice yet. And maybe not even halfway through the season, I think he could be the backup goalie for Washington.
Excellent. Yeah, Holtby, once he started playing in the playoffs and they took Grubauer out, everything changed. And you're absolutely right. That was a heck of a save and definitely a series-turning save in Game 2 against Vegas. Let's go into some of their prospects. The Hockey News has them rated as the 29th out of 31 teams as far as prospects. They do have a few good ones. We've already touched on Travis Boyd, who we both think will make this team on the 4th line this year, and the goaltender Ilya Samsonov. Let's touch on a few of them. So the first one I'll touch on is their first-round pick from 2018, so this year, a defenseman, Alexander Alexeyev, who played in the WHL last year for the Red Deer Rebels, had 45 games, 37 points, and then in the playoffs he had 3 games and ended up with 5 points. Bit of a potential there. He's still pretty young, probably going to play another year in the WHL with the Red Deer Rebels. Second one on my list is another defenseman, Lucas Johansson, who played for the Hershey Bears last year. He was their first-round pick in 2016. With the Hershey Bears, he had 74 games, only 27 points. But as you mentioned, going through a lot of these guys' stats, the Hershey Bears were absolutely awful last year and didn't make the playoffs and have a lot of room for improvement. The last one I'll touch on is centerman Shane Gersich, who actually has an outside chance of making this team this year. He was a 5th-round pick in 2014. They signed him out of the University of North Dakota in the NCAA. He played 40 games for North Dakota last year, had 29 points, signed his NHL contract, and played 3 games at the end of the year with the Washington Capitals and had 1 assist. So he's a guy that potentially could crack this lineup, but will probably get some seasoning with Hershey to start the season. Who do you have and who do you like, Matt, for other prospects on this team?
All right. Yeah, so there isn't a whole lot more. I have Riley Barber, who was a 6th-round pick in 2012. So he's getting up there a little bit in age for a prospect, but he had 20 goals and 38 points in only 60 games last year, and could be a fringe player, getting a couple of call-ups possibly during the year. Another guy is goalie Vitek Vanacek, who was a 2nd-round pick in 2014. Another goalie prospect. He went 12-13 in 32 games for Hershey, but his save percentage was only .888, and a goals against average just above 3. So not great numbers, but being a 2nd-round pick, there's still a lot of potential for improvement and maybe possibly making the team a few years down the road. But yeah, just touching on Travis Boyden, he had 47 points in 61 games, which is pretty good numbers. And Nathan Walker had 22 points in 40 games in the American League. So both of those guys should be pushing for spots. And just to touch on Lucas Johansson, again, brother of Ryan Johansson, Nashville Predators top centerman. I think maybe he could get a call-up this year, potentially with injuries. Still had a decent year for his first year pro. But yeah, as you said, there isn't a whole lot more out there. But yeah, if like Alexeyev and Samsonov are their big two. But with Alexeyev, I didn't mind that pick. I think he's a bigger defenseman. And with those Russian players that the Caps like so much, and they seem to thrive when they do pick a Russian player.
Well, funny you mentioned Ryan Johansson, of course, Lucas Johansson and Ryan Johansson. Of course, Ryan Johansson in the news again this week with his Twitter battle with Ryan Kessler from the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. Those two guys, I think, both need to grow up and can't wait till they face each other. Hopefully Kessler's healthy enough to put his play where his mouth is when those two guys play each other. So Washington, let's get back on the subject. 105 points last year, Stanley Cup champions. Where do you see them finishing this year?
All right, so I see them finishing in 2nd place in the Metropolitan. So just one step down from finishing 1st in the division last year. I think they'll probably most likely, as I have it, most likely be facing Columbus again in the 1st round of the playoffs. But with the Metropolitan being so tight, just a few points here and there could change where teams finish in that top 3 in the division. But they might have a little bit of the Stanley Cup hangover to start the year, so that's why I see them slipping just a little bit. But yeah, they'll be right back in the playoffs again, and we'll see if they can repeat again this year.
For me, I see them finishing as well in 2nd place in the Metropolitan, the craziest division in hockey right now. I see them getting around 105 points again, maybe a few more, but I'm kind of worried about them losing Barry Trotz and the way that he coaches and can implement such a good disciplined system. And if they slip at all from that system, if they continue to play the same system, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this club because, of course, any team that gets into a small little losing streak, we know that if the mindset's not right, they can definitely go into a big losing streak. So anyways, that's it for today's show, guys. We're going to continue tomorrow with our final, second to last team, the Winnipeg Jets, and our 31 teams in 31 days. So thanks again for joining us or watching wherever you are. Remember to like and share us on Facebook. If you want a shout out, share our post, and we'll give you a shout out during our broadcast at the beginning. And follow us on YouTube. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow.